Hello, my name is Julie Kentosh, and I am the Oregon Section ITE President. And on behalf of Oregon ITE, welcome to our May webinar. So today we have a lineup of 3 awesome presenters who will be sharing their work related to innovative safety analytics tools. First up, we have Sean Quayle, who will be presenting on Washington County's experience in safety analytics pilot study. Then Dave Hirsch will present on how, Sean, hi Sean. Next, Dave Hirsch will be presenting on how ODOT has been implementing video safety tools in the field in Region 4. Hi, Dave. And then finally, Christina McDaniel-Wilson will provide information on ODOT's statewide effort to implement video safety analytics. And before we get started, and there's Christy. Hi, Christy. Before we get started, we have some announcements and housekeeping. Tomorrow evening, Oregon ITE will be hosting a virtual happy hour. The event starts at 5:15 p.m. It's a free event, but we need attendees to register so that we know how many people to expect. We'll be dividing attendees into reasonable sized groups to help facilitate some more natural conversations. And you can stay with one group or visit all the groups to kind of work the room, so to speak. And although ITE loves to buy the first round, this time you will need to bring your own beverage. Registration closes tonight, so please register today. You can find a link to register in our email newsletter or our website, oregonite.org. And I look forward to seeing your faces tomorrow night on my computer screen. So on to housekeeping, we're asking participants to turn off limit use of their webcams to help improve bandwidth for our presenters. And Maggie Lynn has a few items as well, so I'll pass it on to Maggie now.
Thank you, Julie. I'd like to introduce the raise hand function of the webinar. We can use the raise hand for our Q&A session. So I'd like to test this function right now. So if you're in Oregon, please raise your hand. Great. I see about 50%. So now please put your hands down. And for those of you that are outside Oregon, please raise your hand. 12%, 14%, good number. And please put your hands down. And if you are outside of the US, please raise your hand. We've got 3 people. So that function is working well. And you can put your hands down now. And I'd like to have the attendees to be familiar with the chat function and the question function. There should be a chat box where during the webinar, you can type in your question. You can choose to send your question, send a question to the panelist, and that way I can track them as questions instead of chat messages that's intended to be sent to all the attendees. And this would be a good time to type a few test messages or test questions so I know that it's working. Well, I don't, oh, thank you. I do see test questions coming in. So with that, we'll start with a few poll questions to get a better understanding of our audience today. First, we would like to know where you work at. I'll give 5 more seconds, and we're seeing a good number of responses already. Okay. We have a good number of private section employees and public agency employees, as well as vendors. That's pretty interesting. And next, I'm gonna run another poll question. We would like to know what you do as a professional. Okay. The majority of this webinar's attendees are traffic engineers, and we do have some planners and vendors and people in the research. Before we give the presentation to Sean, we would like to know the experience with video safety analytics tool. That gives us a good understanding of our audience experience. Okay, closing the poll now. A lot of the audience have heard of the safety analytics tools, but not used them, and some has used or implemented them, and there's a good number of people have never heard of it or used it. So with that, I'm going to turn to Julie to introduce our next presenter, Sean.
Thank you, Maggie. So Sean Quayle will kick off today's speaker series. Sean is a traffic engineer with Washington County. He helps manage the traffic signals and ITS group and is passionate about effective treatments to enhance mobility and safety. Sean has spent 3 years in the public sector with Washington County. This was preceded by 12 years in the private sector with Kittleson and Associates in Orlando and Portland. He is a graduate of Oregon State University and the University of Tennessee. So yes, his favorite color is orange.
All right, thank you for that introduction, Julie and Maggie. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation. Unfortunately we can't be together in person. I look forward to a day when we can actually be together and network and interact, but in the meantime, this is technology to be thankful for, that we can at least share our experiences. So I'm coming to you to share a story about our experiences with a particular safety analytics program, Street Simplified. Let's see, we got started with Street Simplified probably back in 2018. Andrew Jansen from Street Simplified came to us and the city of Hillsborough to introduce their new product and talk a little bit about their startup and the concept that they were trying to do with using cameras to actually measure the interior of the intersection and directly look at conflicts and quantify them as far as near misses, as well as get counts at the same time. And so we were intrigued. We did a first round pilot at one intersection, Brookwood and Cornell, which you'll see quite a bit in this presentation. We did that with them, kind of a first round, and it was definitely rough, but there was a lot of potential. And so there was enough there for us to make the leap and hop in and do a pilot contract with them to do 6 troublesome intersections and looking at it over a 3-day period, which was the longest study that Street Simplified had done to that date. It required us to go out there and change batteries on their units because they don't run for a full, 3 days worth of time. So I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about this second study, which has taken place over the last fall, winter time period, kind of wrapping up at least our recording in January of this past year, which thankfully was before this whole COVID thing happened. So we're pretty confident in the counts that we're getting, as well as the typical nature of the traffic operations that we're looking at. So I'm going to start with the end. So what I'd expect by the end of this presentation is you guys will be familiarized with Street Simplified. You'll learn a little bit about the typical setup and cost range, as well as the tools and metrics that are delivered. One of the things that we see with these safety analytics programs is that they're high fidelity and low duration. And so seeing the fidelity of things in video is so helpful to quantify whether it's a high risk behavior or a low risk behavior and start to understand the context with which the users are interacting with the signal state indications and understand what's going on. And then the nice thing with the tool, at least with Street Simplified, is there's some pretty cool filtering and different tools to look at the particular problems as they're arising, which may be red light running, jaywalking, blocking, other things like that. So we can actually filter by movement and time of day, and I'll show a little bit about that as we go through. And then I'm going to highlight a little bit about opportunities for improvement. There is still a fair bit of manual processing that a user has to go through once they get these videos. So typically they're delivering about 100 videos per intersection of near misses. And so that's a lot of data to go through and check and see, okay, what was going on here, what was not a real issue, what was a real issue. And then we're finding situations with some misclassification, double counting. And I think there's still a growing body of work that's needed to verify and validate that the counts that are coming from these automated systems can be ground truth to a certain percentage. I know Andrew sent along at least one study that they've done that shows that they're well over 95% accurate. But I think that's a real need within the community, is to do some ground truthing to make sure that we're all comfortable with the accuracy of the tools. And this is just kind of circling, classification. And I've already talked with Andrew about this, and their team's already working on trying to address expanding out that crosswalk area so that bicyclist that's riding through gets classified as a jaywalker because they're going across, quote unquote, the crosswalk while it's red if you're looking from left to right. So here's a screen image of the 6 test intersections that we did. So kind of starting from top left and working our way down, that's Brookwood and Cornell and Hillsborough. And then the next one down is 185th and Evergreen, also in Hillsborough, Beaverton area. 185th at Baseline is the next intersection down. That's in Hillsborough, Beaverton area as well. And then we have Barnes and Baltic in the top right. That's at the entrance to St. Vincent Hospital. So that's actually the emergency access to the emergency room. So we see some really interesting red light running events. Definitely a crash pattern that I'll talk about here a little bit later. And then we've got 10th and Washington, the next one down, and 12th and Sherwood at Boone's, which is down in Tualatin. And you can see we picked a couple of these intersections because they have rail going through them, as well as locations that we knew had higher crash rates, and wanted to gather the video analytics to start looking at these locations. So what does this gear end up looking like? Here's a couple pictures that show you kind of the look of the hardware. It's a GoPro camera with a battery and a fan in it. And I'll let Andrew talk in the chat if he wants to talk a little more about battery life and some of the things they're doing. But it's actually on a magnet, high power magnet. And in this pilot, we actually had our signal techs out there putting the cameras up. I'm told that Street Simplified at least has a relationship with a couple different count vendors, including Quality Counts, to go out there and put up, install, and then take down the devices. But they're connected to an app, and so they can see the view from the camera as they're put up on the pole, and they can determine whether or not that's going to meet their needs. The first go round of this, we did just 2 cameras per intersection, and what we were discovering is that's sufficient for counts, but it was having trouble seeing all the different signal indications. And so for the light state is what they call it, to be able to see red, yellow, green, and walk, don't walk, they put up 4 cameras per each of these 6 intersections, and we got a lot better results with those. And then at the bottom is kind of Street Simplify's at least starting out pricing model. So the far left is kind of counts, and you get a 20. These are based on a 24-hour count. You get counts, turn movement counts, speeds, crosswalk counts, and bike turning movement counts. The next step up is the safety analytics, where you get near misses, speeding, crossings off the crosswalk, and then the last piece that's an add-on. So these are all additive to one another. Is the red light running, opposing on green, some of the intersection blocking, things that are dependent on the light state or the signal state that's happening out there. And so if you look at it all together installed, it works out to just under $6,000 an intersection to have somebody like Quality Counts and Street Simplify go out and do a whole intersection 24 hours and get turn and movement counts for the whole period, as well as the safety information. So again, talked a little bit about the fact that that's high fidelity and low duration. What we've been working from is very low fidelity, high duration crash data. And so this is just an example of what we end up plotting out. It shows us a couple lines on an intersection. We can start to get some guesstimates as to what the trends are over time. But certainly having video to confirm or verify what's going on that might be leading to or causal factors for these types of crash patterns is useful. And one of the big picture questions you'll find at the end is, how much data is enough? And it really does depend on the use case that you're tackling. We had 4 of the 6 intersections that we studied that were on our SPIS list in the top 15. So definitely focusing on those highest safety concern corridors and intersections first makes a lot of sense. Let me just quickly jump through what these counts look like on the interface. I will say that Street Simplified has a really nice dashboard and interface with which to work from. And then they also have the option to download this data in CSV format. And the nice thing is that the CSV format matches what we see for outputs from Quality Counts. And so for those agencies that have built tools that link into some of the Quality Counts outputs, this is a nice add-on to be able to process through any existing scripts or things that you might have. So this shows just turning movement counts at the intersection. Right now they have some of their interfaces. That top left, you can see the AM peak, the PM peak are all day. And then the counts in the different screens, counts per motion, overall counts you see as a plot across the entire time of day. Nice theme for those of you that are working in HCM analyses and trying to make some assumptions on right turns on red. You can see this by approach and by time of day. So not just a peak hour turn movement count, you can see what the right turns on red are doing the rest of the day. Kind of give you some confidence on some of those assumptions you're making with your analysis. Average speeds by motion, you can see 85th percentile, average, median information. This has been really useful for us as we start to think about our clearance intervals for yellow and reds at the intersection. And one of the plots that I'm not showing on here, but that Andrew and his team have put together, Street Simplified, is showing the speeds as a basis of time against the signal indication. So as you'd expect, at the startup of green, you have startup lost time and it takes longer for people to get up to speed. But what we can see is before the light turns yellow or red, we can see what that speed is that we should potentially be using as a determinant for setting our yellow times and potentially our all red clearance intervals. Vulnerable road users is their terminology for peds and bikes. And so you can start to quantify folks that are actually on the sidewalk and using the crosswalks, and you can break that down by different modes. This was kind of interesting because at least at Cornell Brookwood for this day, we had a lot more pedestrians using that east leg crossing and not so much using the other legs. Bike counts on streets. This is becoming more important for us as we look at bike distinguishing detection and trying to figure out how we set up our channels and zones. Do we need to do this on a lane by lane basis? Do we need to look at left turns? Do we have any bikes using the left turns? And figuring out where to make those investments. And then really that moves from counts into now the kind of the safety module, and kind of the highlight of that is the near miss counts. And so this is looking at a metric called PET, or post encroachment time. So it's using the cameras to look at the time differential between users crossing paths. And you can see it plotted out in the bottom left there. It shows the location of where those conflict points are occurring. And then you can see in kind of the top center there a plot that shows where, at what times of day you're seeing the different near misses, and you can actually filter out by approach, motion, or even user. And then in the bottom right, you get a table that shows the list of the different post encroachment times and videos that accompany them. And I'll show a couple of videos here as we get along here. One of the things that I do want to point out is this post encroachment time. Filtering that down to something that's lower is oftentimes more advantageous. We found some of the post encroachment times that are 4, 5, 6 seconds really aren't big concerns, and so those lower numbers tend to be more important. Let's see, red light trajectories. So again, this is showing plots very similarly, shows videos very similarly. So you can see red light running events that are happening. Again, you've got to check the videos just to make sure that they're not misclassified, but some really useful information for identifying trends. And then speeding. So they filter this by any road user going 10 miles an hour or more over the posted speed limit. And so then it filters that out, and you can see by time of day. You can also see the videos, and this is useful for making engineering and planning decisions. You can see intersection blocking counts. So again, this shows places where the intersection's blocked. This is useful for making sure that we've got good progression or time sinks in place. In this case, particularly concerning with vehicles backing up over the rail line. Definitely something we want to look at a little bit closer. The tricky piece with this video is it is so high fidelity that everything looks like a major issue. And so trying to balance this against mobility needs and also quantifying whether it's relatively a big issue or if it just is something that you want to compare the trends in your reported crash data to. So I'm going to try to switch over and show you a couple of videos if that works okay. Let me see. This first one is a red light running example. Oh shoot, I closed it. My apologies on that. I'll open this up again. And Maggie, just chime in if I'm going long. Maybe you give me a 5-minute warning. So I'll play this more than once. This is kind of the layout of what the video looks like. You get 2 different video image views, and you get a trace in the bottom right of the concerning activity. And so in this case, you're going to see a red light runner go through the intersection. And it shows you the red light running event for that vehicle speed. And so you'll see it best kind of coming from the top right. They go from right to left. So if you look in the top right screen, you'll see a red light runner come through. So we're green in the opposing direction, and you've got a truck that's just kind of wandering through the intersection. And so this is actually something that we see quite a bit as a trend at this intersection, something we want to look at closer. This next one, let me zoom this out, is actually intersection blocking. So you see this truck. This is at 185th and Evergreen, where we've got closely spaced signals just to the right off of the screen, which is causing this truck to stop. We've got a downstream signal a couple hundred feet that's red. And so you have situations like this that can occur. And so my thought process is that some of this is really useful for having safety discussions with developers in this area, that want to add trips both to this intersection and to downstream intersections to illustrate the real kind of systematic need to increase signal spacing, in addition to revisiting and looking at some of the signal timing that's out there. See, this next one is a near miss, I believe, and this is also at 185th and Evergreen. So you've got a bunch of pedestrians crossing, you got a lot of blocking happening, and you had a right turner that just pulled out in front of traffic. And so I'll play that again so you can see it. Probably looking to the top right here, you'll see a right turner from the side street turn on to the main line. And because of the blocking, they can't really see. They shouldn't go, but they decide to go anyway. And the vehicles are going around the blocking events. Now, thankfully, there wasn't a crash, but this is the value of that post-encroachment information, is it's showing those near misses that we believe are far more frequent than the actual crashes occurring out there. And then the last video I'm going to show you today, at least, is Brookwood and Cornell. This is a pretty blatant jaywalker. So you're going to see them more clearly in kind of the top right screen. They'll be coming across the crosswalk. We've got the light state as green, kind of the green box around the signals, and just showing kind of the behavior that's happening. And this pedestrian decided he was going to cross both legs at the same time. Now, this is one of the things I talked to Andrew about. It would be great to see that continue, that video clip continue until that pedestrian's all the way across the intersection, so we can see the full movement of what occurred. But I'll play that one more time so you can see pedestrian jaywalking, and thankfully vehicles yielding to them legally. But that's just a quick sample of what these videos look like. And so how do you apply some of this? I'm going to share just quickly a couple of case studies. So at both Cornell and Brookwood and 185th at baseline, we have time of day based flashing yellow arrows. And we were able to use some of the post-encroachment time information in the conflicts to identify very clear trends with when we turn the flashing yellow arrow back on. So this plot shows that we've got the flashing yellow turning back on at 7:30 at night, and you can see the conflicts for the near misses for the main line left turns go from less than 5 to shooting up over 30 or 40. Now you watch the videos, and the vast majority of them are not high-risk maneuvers, but there's a handful of them that are risky maneuvers, and so we believe that that's probably more likely to contribute to crashes in the future. So this is a measure we think of exposure. And so what we did with this information is we changed the time of day schedule to shorten the flashing yellow arrow to start instead at 10:30 rather than 7:30, where we see those natural conflicts between those movements start dropping down. And we looked at some of the crash data and looked at the times of day that they were occurring, and the vast majority at this example of Cornell and Brookwood were happening while the flashing yellow was on. You can see that kind of at the bottom middle of your screen. Our weekday, we had 6 reported crashes that were left turn failure to yield, and weekends were 9. Those were all when flashing arrow was on. And we think by turning off the flashing arrow except late at night, we can eliminate the vast majority of those crashes, at least from a projection standpoint. This is for Barnes and Baltic, which consistently ranks at the top of our SPIS lists. It's the location that was the entrance to the hospital. So you can see why we've got a lot of emergency movements that are happening through this intersection. But what also jumps out is that this plot that Street Simplified put together using our crash data showed that we've got that through northbound Baltic, northbound Barnes movement is the vast majority of the conflicts and crashes that are happening out there. And so while looking at the video, we see a lot of red light running. And so what we've done is we had one of the approaches, which happened to be that northbound Barnes approach, already had the yellow tape for the back plates. We went ahead and our crews go out there and put the yellow back plates up for the other 3 approaches. So this intersection has full yellow back plates, which I think will help. And then we also changed the red clearance time here from a standard ITE calculation. We just added a half a second to it, which we also believe will help. And then we're investigating with our county crews, and we'll definitely at some point want to engage ODOT downstream. We think some users on barns are looking past the signal. And so I want to look at signing and striping through this area, as well as the downstream signal, because of the way that the grades work through here. It's conceivable that some motorists coming down barns are looking past the signal and seeing the downstream green. So this has been useful, seeing the video, to really kind of bring into focus the need for looking at safety. So again, this is reiterating some of the needs for improvement. Some of the large vehicles end up contributing to some misclassification. Distinguishing between bikes and peds are important, and then multi-day, being able to display information over multiple days are things that we've talked with Street Simplified about and they're aware of. So quickly, in summary, it's a powerful summary analytic. You get your counts, you get your safety assessment, you're able to do filterings to look at those trends and investigate them a little bit closer for what is really what I think so important, the root cause analysis, what's contributing to these risky behaviors. And then if you combine the video analytics with your reported crash history, you get a clearer picture of safety. And I know that Dave Hirsch and I have had this discussion before, but it sure seems like some of these automated tools have the potential to be more resource efficient than some of our road safety audits, at least at intersections. So last slide, unanswered questions. This is something I want everybody thinking about, because I think as an IT community, we need to start thinking in this way with this newer class of tool coming online. So a question for everybody: should a tool like Street Simplify be required with every count? If we can show that Street Simplify is accurate, why wouldn't we want the safety data in addition to just the count information, particularly for like development review and looking at some of the safety analytics? Not saying that it's going to replace reported crashes, but to augment and make that analysis more robust. And then something that we need to think about, particularly this hits near and dear to my heart as a signal timer, is the trade-off between the reduced crash exposure and your loss of mobility. So when we turn off the flashing yellows by time of day, we're going to lose some mobility and the ability for vehicles to get through the corridor, which in and of itself has second and third order safety ramifications if you start falling back with queuing issues. And so I think all of that's really important to consider. This isn't just a one-dimensional safety is the end all be all. We have to look at mobility and how that impacts things. And then I touched on this earlier, but is it a relative or an objective metric that we're going to use for defining safety thresholds? So how much red light running will we accommodate? And I think a lot of this is somewhat subjective, because it does depend on the tools that you have in your toolbox to try to address the issue going on. How much data is enough? So again, is a 24-hour snapshot enough to confirm the trends and move forward with the safety project that you have a relative confidence is going to be effective? Or do you need more data to try to get at more nuanced, maybe rarer events that happen? And then handling public records requests. So these videos are created, they're stored on Street Simplified's cloud. We get access to it through the cloud. Public records requests, we're going to have to figure that out as an industry, how we want to take ownership of that. If we're going to let Street Simplified or another vendor host those videos and point the public records request through and to those, or are we as agencies going to hold on to them? So with that, I'm going to hand it. I'm going to stop showing my screen, and maybe we can hand it back to Maggie or Julie to introduce our next presenters. Thanks for your attention, guys.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Sean.
And well, before we move on to the next presentation, I want to give the audience some time to type in their questions. In the meantime, I want to run 2 quick poll questions to get a better understanding of how Oregon ITE can help improve our webinars and launch sessions. So first question, we want to know if you're an ITE member. Thank you. We have 70% of the respondents that are ITE member and 30% that are not ITE member. And the next question is about the webinar and our regular ITE events. This is our second webinar since the COVID-19 pandemic. And Oregon ITE, as an organization, we are assessing if we need to provide more webinar options in our future events. So this would help us understand the need from the audience. All right, I'm closing the poll now. And Julie, you see there are a lot of people that actually attended this because it's a webinar. With that, I'm gonna give the floor to Julie to introduce our next presenter.
Thank you, Maggie. Our next presenter will be Dave Hirsch. Dave is the Region Traffic Operations Engineer with ODOT Region 4, located in Bend, Oregon, having started with the agency in 2012. His daily duties include providing technical oversight of the intelligent transportation and traffic signal systems for the region. Prior to joining ODOT, Dave worked for several consultants in Minnesota, specializing in the design and implementation of various multimodal traffic control systems. Dave earned his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Minnesota in 2001.
All right, get my screen up and going here. Always fun to do these webinar little nuances. Well, I want to start off by thanking Sean for doing such a thorough presentation on what Street Simplified is. So that's going to save me sharing a lot of information. Sean and I have been in constant contact, just kind of talking about how we think this tool could be utilized. So for today, Christina McDaniel Wilson is also going to be co-presenting with this on this presentation with me. And we're going to talk about a Street Simplified use case that ODOT Region 4 traffic participated in. This experience was shared with ODOT traffic leadership, which in turn has led to a statewide look into how to use tools like Street Simplified. Christina will be providing a breakdown of where ODOT is at in the process to more readily implement tools such as Street Simplified to better understand intersections with, perhaps puzzling safety histories. So I'm not going to read this to you, but I just wanted to give some context. I first met Andrew Jansen, the CEO of Street Simplified, at another Oregon ITE event called Sensor AMA in May of 2019. So perhaps some of you were there. He was a vendor showing how his new application was sharing information on a test site in Washington County, which Sean graciously showed some of what they were working on. And we just started talking. I thought that his tool was very interesting and worthy of scrutiny. And so we just got to talking, and I had asked him if ODOT could try it, and he said, yeah, let's start that conversation. So we were able to secure a free trial, a Street Simplified. So to date, ODOT has only used Street Simplified once. And we chose the site that's on the screen there. It's US 97 and Veterans Way. This is located in Redmond. This intersection has been a perennial member of the ODOT Top 10 SPIS list. We've implemented low-cost crash reduction countermeasures, such as reflectorized backer plates and advanced signal heads, but we still are seeing continued crashes. And so we really just wanted to gain additional insight as to why these crashes are still happening after we put in the countermeasures. So this is a screenshot, same thing that what Sean showed you. It's a little earlier version than what Sean had showed you, but we collected the video using 2 cameras on opposite corners, and the the data collection took place between August 21st and August 22nd of last year, so it happened all pre-COVID. The cameras were installed by Street Simplified CEO Andrew Jansen, and like Sean said, they now have partnerships with Quality Counts and other like companies to help install the cameras, because it was a little bit of a clunky process, but also not entirely impossible. So Andrew reloaded the batteries at each camera after the first day and then captured a second day of video. So for this case, the batteries lasted about a day. The video was processed by Street Simplified, and they generated automatic measures based off of their algorithms. And then a follow-up report and a PowerPoint presentation were included with the analysis, as was access to the Street Simplified web interface tool, which Sean had given you an example of. So again, John provided some of this. It's just what are some of the metrics that some of the analytics that Street Simplified provides, and I'm not going to list all of those, but for the US 97 at Veterans Way location, several hundred events were detected during the study period, including over 95 near misses with a post-encroachment time, which Sean talked about, of 2.9 seconds or less. So, you know, when Sean was talking about, you know, information on post-encroachment time at like 6 seconds is, you know, may not be valuable. We had quite a few close interaction events that happened. And then we also captured 446 vehicles speeding of at least 10 miles an hour above the speed limit. No pedestrian or cyclist near misses were detected because the pedestrian volumes on the intersection is typically low. And we only captured 9 pedestrians and cyclists throughout the 2 days. But there still may be significant vulnerable road user risk, and you could infer that from some of the video that was captured and people making decisions while you may see a pedestrian on the corner of cutting off those pedestrians. I joked that right before we captured the video and while we were setting it up, I got completely cut off trying to cross on a walk sign, and a car just turned right in front of me. So, and I had a vest on. But just one caveat with this. So due to the camera constraints at the time, so again, this was an older application, the state of the signal indications was not able to be captured. But like Sean has shown, Street Simplified has worked to make that happen. All right, so just looking at some insights, and this is what I've got on the screen is specific to just a southbound west left and a Veterans Way northwest left turn. It's got the heat map that Sean explained. We got information on left through conflicts on all approaches. And so what that did was give us some insight onto, you know, consider restricting permissive lefts when gap times are very low. It also allowed us to consider lead lag left turn phasing optimization. There were instances where we had vehicles waiting to make a left on a permissive, and then the indication turned red and they were kind of trapped in the intersection, made the movement, and then that was followed by a side street left that was basically veering towards that vehicle. And so, you know, if you start lead lagging things based off of what you're seeing out there, you know, you may be getting improved safety results. Other things, from a speeding perspective, you know, it gave some really good insight and videos to implement additional speed reduction countermeasures. And it also helps share this speeding information with people like law enforcement. or with our other safety advocates, so they can kind of see what's going on out there. And instead of just saying people are speeding, it really gives you a tangible, watchable mechanism to be able to share that information. And it's, you know, one of those, a video is worth 1,000 words. So what are the next steps with this? So Region 4 traffic plans to reevaluate how flash channel arrows operate at the intersection. We will do that. However, we're right in the midst of converting from SCATs to ATC controllers running Intellite's max time software. And so, excuse me, I believe that's Q-Freeze max time software. And so SCATs is a little bit difficult to work with. And since we were transitioning, we were waiting to implement the new controllers. We've also shared the speed information with local safety liaison. And then she works with all of our enforcement partners just to be cognizant of what's happening out at that intersection and then what this tool is capable of. And then at this time, we haven't looked at any additional safety countermeasures just because we want to try the reevaluating the flash channel arrows and just seeing what the perspective is from the enforcement community. So with that, I'm going to throw it over to Christina, and she's going to talk about what is ODOT doing with a tool like Street Simplified moving forward. Christina, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay, good. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what happened there. I was, I think I needed to be taken off of mute. But thanks, Dave. So I'm going to pick up here and talk a little bit about the next steps from the headquarters. After Dave presented his findings, we went out to the regions to gauge interest for a small region-wide pilot study. Our thinking was that this might be a really useful way for the region safety investigators to get at some information they wouldn't normally have access to. For example, crosswalk crossing times. This could be useful for evaluating locations with a higher proportion of high-risk vulnerable users, such as maybe locations where you have a lot of school-age children or an aging population. Some of the causal factors, such as red light running and failure to yield to vulnerable users in a crosswalk, which leads to the near-miss analysis. We rely on historical crash data a lot. And that doesn't include any information on near-miss events. It's a pretty important piece of safety information. Just because a near-miss event didn't cause an injury or a crash, it had the potential to do so. And without a tool like this, we really don't have a good way of identifying those near-miss situations. So if this tool can help us detect a pattern that we wouldn't otherwise have information about, then we can be proactive about putting a countermeasure in place to improve safety at that location. So we've been working with Andrew Jansen for the past couple of months to help set up this work. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. We asked each of the regions to send us up to 5 intersections that they wanted to study, and then a little bit of background on why they selected each location. And they were really, really responsive. The turnaround time was pretty quick. Most regions submitted lists that were more than 5 locations. I think initially we had a total of 37 intersections that the regions were interested in. And they selected these locations based on a variety of reasons. Some selected locations that are regularly flagged as a top 5 or 10% SPIS location. These included locations such as what Dave mentioned, where they had already implemented a number of low-cost countermeasures that didn't seem to be working, so they were looking for additional information to help them determine what the fix should be. They also submitted locations that had a high potential for turning movement conflicts, so maybe the intersections were unusual or unique with their configuration. Also, high frequency of crashes involving vulnerable users, that was pretty common in the selection. Or locations where they had received a number of asked ODOT questions expressing concern over safety, but the locations hadn't been flagged previously as part of our crash data or any other analysis. And then some regions selected locations where they wanted to assess implementation of a specific countermeasure, such as leading pedestrian interval, and then use this as an opportunity to document the operations or the safety benefits. Next slide, please. Not every intersection that we selected was a good candidate, so Andrew provided us with some background data on how the data would be collected, and I won't go into that because I think the previous presentations did a really good job of kind of showing you the camera setup and things like that. But what we learned is that some of the locations we had selected, the intersections were either too large and it would have been too challenging to put up cameras, or in some situations, we had actually 2 intersections where we thought we just had 1. Sometimes we had some locations where we had wires running in front of the signal head, so that may not have been a good location, or we had issues with pole mounting heights and things like that. Next slide, please. So Andrew went through our list of intersections, and then he gave us some good feedback with locations that he recommended for the analytics and some that he didn't recommend it. And he also put any added notes for concerns and issues. So just because a location may not have been a good site for the light state analytics, other data could have been collected there. So it was kind of up to us as to whether we wanted to keep that location or add another one in place of it. So after the review, we landed on 5 good intersections within each region. And because a good chunk of the cost is basically setting up the cameras and going and retrieving those cameras, some of the locations in Region 4 and Region 5 came back pretty expensive. So Andrew went through a few iterations of a data collection plan to minimize that cost. And what we ended up with is being able to collect 25 locations in about 6 trips. I mentioned that we came up with 25 locations, and we did that because there could still be unanticipated issues. So while we're collecting those 25 locations, Andrew is guaranteeing analytics for at least 20 of those. So that kind of gives us a little bit of cushion if one location we get out there or they get out there and find that, the data didn't collect as it was supposed to, or maybe there was inclement weather. And so it gave us a little bit of a buffer. Next slide, please. This is my first time working with a sole source contract, and so we're working pretty closely with our Office of Procurement to set up the process. So I'm anticipating that this process may take a little longer to get the contract in place, but that being said, with the current COVID situation, we aren't really planning to collect data until probably next spring, so I think this will work out okay. Another note, I think there's value with this tool beyond the current safety work that we're specifically looking at. I mentioned this work to some engineers in our planning analysis unit, and they're also interested in evaluating this tool. For them, they felt like it could be useful for planning and project efforts. They could see a lot of value in the causal factors, so bike ped movements, red light running, intersection blocking, for the purposes of calibrating SIDRA and Synchro and those micro simulation analysis. The bike and ped counts they were particularly interested in because that would be good for the crosswalk and intersection analysis, and potentially also for turning movement speeds. That's something that we set up as part of our simulations, and we often use default values. So if we wanted to improve on some of those default values, this could potentially be an avenue for updating some of that. And so I'm pretty excited about this tool because I think it offers a lot of opportunities that we don't normally have access to. And so I'm really appreciative of Andrew's help as we step through this process with all of the feedback and the work that he's putting in to help set up this contract. So I'll stop there and ask if there are any questions.
All right, I'm going to stop showing my screen right now.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew and Christina. We are seeing questions coming in, and we're going to start our Q&A session with Sean answering questions and give the audience time to type their questions related to David and Christina's presentation. So I'll start with reading the questions, and Sean will be answering the questions. First question is related to the red light running incident. The question was, the red light running incident was truly eye-opening. How are you using this data to improve enforcement with officers at specific site? And the same person asked the follow-up question. When the red light running is being caused by inadequate progression, clearly not the case with the example of the pickup, has changing signal coordination helped reduce red light running frequency? So Sean.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Hopefully you can. Great questions. You know, the cool thing with the new tool is it causes us to change our paradigm of how we think about things. And, you know, your second question is a great one. We've got some limited research and observation on coordination, and typically when you have good coordination, you should have less red light running events. But we haven't really done a whole lot of empirical measurement of that. And so one of the things I was talking with Andrew about yesterday was this is an interesting tool as a resource for before-after evaluation. So as we identify issues and we implement safety treatments, whether they're signal timing related or sighting striping or something else, you know, it's useful then to have the data to come back to and do a before-after. It could even be, you know, some coordinated work with law enforcement. This data, frankly, is so new that we're still trying to wrap our heads around what's there and what's not. I will say that when we have specific locations, we do try to work with law enforcement to have their help if we think that it is something that is largely enforcement related. I think that there's something else going on because of the trends here, that it's not just that people are willfully running red lights all the time. I think there's something going on that's causing them to not see the light. And we see that from, you know, the lateness with which people are entering the intersection. Something is going on where people aren't getting it, and it comes back to human behavior and opens up a whole different area for investigating things.
Okay. Thank you, Sean. The next question, maybe. Well, we've got a few questions and comments saying the pedestrian showing in the video appears to be picking up something from the road. Mike Ard made a comment saying that pedestrian didn't continue to cross. From the video, it's obvious he dropped some material from his vehicle into the roadway, stopped, and walked out to retrieve it. He's picking it up at the end of the video.
Yep, and that may be, but I think either way, it would be nice for the video to show the pedestrian safely making it back to a curb before ending.
Yeah. So the next question is, how did you find the video's examples? Does the software identify the near misses and save the video for review later?
Yeah, so that's a good point of clarification. So you saw some of those images that I was showing that had videos listed on them. So that's all saved in the cloud. So the process is you put up the devices, they record the information, and then Andrew's team, they run it through their algorithm using Amazon Web Services, actually processes the data and spits it out onto their cloud-based interface, and then they do some QA/QC on the data, and then it's stored there with a username and password. So we, as Washington County, have our own passwords to be able to get in and look at our intersections that have been delivered to us. And so once they finish the QA/QC process, then they'll notify us. We hop in and we start looking at the videos. And my understanding, and I see Andrew on the line, so maybe he can chime in as well, but my understanding is that once an agency's paid for that, that access to that data is available until such point as something changes.
Great. And Andrew, would you like to make any additional comment?
Yeah, I'll only make a couple. One of which is on the pricing. Our pricing is a little below 5,000. I think there was the pricing that said that on the sheet, Sean, but I think you mentioned 6,000. So, so sometimes some agencies have thresholds that are at the 5,000 mark, and we want to make this tool as available as we can. And so that hopefully will allow some agencies to take advantage of this and try it at the very least. Other than that, we're happy to take questions, and my email was shown in at the end of one of the slides. My email is andrew@streetsimplified.com, but I'd be happy to, if any of you are interested, to reach out, and I'm happy to have a conversation.
Hey, Andrew. So this next question, because Maggie, I can see some of the questions. Thank you for forwarding those to me because I wasn't able to see them in my chat. But it asks about, it'd be interesting to do some analysis of the gap-dependent flashing yellow arrow, because you don't have a lot of good data on that yet. And I agree, that would be really interesting to look at the conflicts when the flashing arrow is on versus when it's not on. Can we get the light state of a flashing yellow yet, or is that something your team's still working on with the tool?
We are still working on that. We've done some early prototyping, but I can't commit to that yet. The other thing we have done is we have been able to measure gap times between vehicles. And so if that's of interest, you combine those two analysis types, and I think there can be some very interesting things. That's not on our platform yet, but if someone requested it, we could add that as an add-on feature.
Good. And then I see another question here. Do you think this tool has value in a more rural setting without signalization? And I would say yes. Anywhere you have a safety problem where seeing a spot location, this data is potentially useful for getting video of what's happening. The one thing I would caution you with rural, if you're really low volume and it's a really kind of nuanced safety situation, you might have to collect more than 24 hours to get at what you want to see with safety risks and causations out there. Let's see, did the red, yellow, green mapping work equally well with span wire? Well, it just depends on the camera's viewpoint. So what the camera can see is what the algorithm can use. And so at, I think it was Barnes Baltic, we had some issues with both utility lines and the span wire, causing some issues with being able to see the light state consistently. But most of our mast arm locations where we didn't have utility conflicts, we didn't have any issues with light states from what I can recall, Andrew.
Yep, that's more or less true. We had a little bit of an issue one of the days at 185th and Evergreen where there's high wind and it has span wires without the bottom strap, stabilization strap, and we had some issues there, but it was only for one of the days. And when we do have an issue with light state, we just throw out light state. We don't record incorrect signalization results.
The last question that I see, at least on my feed here, is there any association between the yellow change and the all red and the occurrence of red light running? It sounds like a great research topic because I think that's, I think intuitively what we believe is short term by increasing the yellow change and the all red that you'll reduce some of the red light running, but then drivers are intuitive, and what we've seen in other longitudinal studies in Minnesota and Florida is that drivers figure it out and you start actually seeing more red light running. So red light running can be caused by a lot of different things, capacity, line of sight, a lot of different things. And so I guess my answer would be it depends. But the video is certainly compelling to illustrate the problems with it and the real risk and get people's attention.
So on the Street Simplified end, we are researching that actively right now, working on implementing and testing the different equations for yellow clearance and all red intervals, and so we'll have more information on that coming up.
Okay, and that was a question from Randy McCord, and he had his hand raised, so I'm unmuting him and see if he has any additional comment about this. Randy?
Hey, Maggie, thanks. I was pretty impressed that you were able to get me turned on. There's clear research going on this yellow clearance, the ITE's recommended practice. And so Andrew's point is well taken. There's a wide array of data sets that are being looked at, and this is really one of the most high value and emerging data sets that we'll be looking at to assess that. I think Sean's point's really well taken in that I just don't think we know, and we need to get some research and we need to get it fast. So FHWA has put together about $250,000, and I think ODOT is putting money towards this. I think we're assembling a significant amount of information so we can get to answers. I mean, Sean shouldn't have to sit back and scratch his head. We should know the answer to this question in our profession, and so we're going to jump in and make that happen.
Thank you, Randy. I've got one more question. I think that's for all of the presenters. Does one day give you enough data to draw conclusions?
I would say it depends. From our six intersection test, you know, a lot of the trends showed themselves in the first 24 hours. I think Andrew had a pretty good way of characterizing it with sort of the 80-20 rule, which is pretty true in a lot of business applications. So 80% of your issue you usually see in that first 24-hour period, and then 20% of you know, additional confirmation or other nuances you'll see in the rest of the data. So for most of our suburban applications, we had enough volume to where we were seeing trends pretty obviously in the first 24 hours. But it depends, and it kind of depends on how we learn how to use this tool. Because I think what I'd like to be able to see is, as we get more intersections measured, we could start doing a relative comparison. And we start figuring out, okay, we have crash data, but does the trends in the reported crashes match what we're seeing in the trends with, say, post-encroachment time or red light running? Things that we think are contributing causes to exposure, which should lead to reported crashes, but we know don't always lead to that.
Mm-hmm. And David and Christina, do you have additional take on this?
I mean, I would just second what
I would add
Sean
that I agree.
Yeah. Go ahead, Christina.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if I was jumping in. A little bit of a lag on my side. I would just say that I echo Sean's thoughts as well, and then I'm hopeful that this pilot study is super successful and that we add this as a regular tool to our engineering safety investigations toolbox, so that, you know, when we start adding more and more intersections, if we need more than a 24-hour count, we can go back and put up another camera and watch it again. We can do before and after studies. So I'm really optimistic about how well we do with this data, and hopeful that, again, this becomes a pretty common tool that we rely on to help analyze intersections, whether they're urban or rural.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add on top of that is I'm really looking forward to the potential of looking at locations that have perceived safety problems. It's something that we hear a lot about, but we don't have good answers for. You know, we have several locations throughout Region 4 where we just have people making poor gap choices. For whatever reason, they're just pulling out in front of other cars. We don't see a high crash instance, but we do know that, you know, as volumes go up, the opportunity for you know, people choosing those poor gaps goes up as well. So excited to see what we can do with this tool and happy to share it with this entire, IT community so we can further our understanding of how to use it.
Thank you. There's one last question. I think it's related to the pedestrian incident. It says that the drivers aren't obeying the ped laws, turning before they should. So that might
seems
that your question.
That seems like a statement, maybe not a question, but that's the beauty of the video. Maybe somebody can clarify.
Okay. I think we've got all the questions answered from the question box.
Hey, Maggie, can I chime in real quick here? So I know there's a lot of folks in the audience that this is their first time seeing the tool. I would just say, as you're thinking about lining out this pilot and even for the ODOT regions, that you guys be careful that you've got enough budgeted resources and hours to be able to do your own post-processing. Because Andrew's team do a great job of delivering a whole bunch of data, but you've got to have the time and the resources really to go in and look at some of these videos and look at the data and draw your own conclusions and start to document even within them, because it certainly isn't yet kind of a automated, it tells you what the worst case problem was and you're good to go. Now I know Andrew and his team are working on that, but just as an example, not all post-encroachment times are created equal. So somebody makes a left turn in front of an oncoming through vehicle versus somebody makes a left turn right after an oncoming left turn vehicle. They both get recorded as the same, maybe 2-second post-encroachment time. But I would argue that the person that turned in front of a vehicle that had an inadequate gap acceptance caused a much higher risk concern. And so, being able to look through the data and make those quantifications is going to be really important to getting to something that you can actually act on.
Yeah, and I'll second that, Sean. I think that's exactly correct. You had mentioned how, we've been talking back and forth about, can this get us part of the way to a full-on road safety audit? And I think as long as you're looking at this with the same lens as you would with a road safety audit, to understand that there's going to be some expert, nuanced look at this, then you'll account for enough time. But yes, just getting the videos isn't enough. It's really diving in and trying to understand what is that video trying to tell you.
Okay. I got a response from Tiana saying that was just a statement. I think that this can give us information on where we need to do education. Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, and the videos are great for public outreach and talking to folks and showing the real safety needs. I come back to context though, because there's a real risk in our industry by showing safety concerns that there's going to be a whole bunch of dollars thrown at making everything very restrictive as far as mobility. And that's fine as long as the agency and all the decision makers go into it with eyes wide open. But what we don't have is something that's the equivalent of a shiny video version of mobility and keeping traffic moving and keeping traffic from backing up and blocking things. That really does need to be balanced in the way, because safety obviously is the priority, but we can't let it take so much of a priority that we start killing our freeways and arterials and other things.
Okay, I've got one more question. Are the videos collected considered public record? Are they shielded from being used for discovery in litigation? Who would be the best to answer this question?
I see Andrew smiling.
I'll make a comment. We've talked to our lawyer about it. Certain parts are publicly available, certain parts are not. It depends on if we can get an agreement with the agency. It depends on who hosts. There's a lot of factors involved, and we haven't come up with a clear standard yet. But there is at least some paths that could lead to it not being considered public record. And there are some paths where it would be considered a public record.
Okay. Thank you. With that, we have all the questions answered, and I don't have anyone raising hands. So thank you very much for attending our webinar. Sorry, one more question coming in. Has Andrew considered integrating their algorithm to existing detection system like Webtronics or FLIR camera running on the ATC controller or central signal system?
Thank you for that. Great question. So short of it is, we actually are exploring those opportunities. If you're interested, give us a call and we can discuss kind of what your infrastructure looks like. We will not be running it on Wavtronics. Wavtronics is not a video-based system, but every other type of controller or a video system, Iteris, Econolite, FLIR, GridSmart, MyoVision, those rhythm engineering, peak traffic, and even existing PTZ or other types of cameras. If you can connect them to the internet, in theory, it's possible. They do need to be pointed at the intersection. PTZs are a little bit annoying if somebody moves them all the time. But give us a call and we can evaluate that and see if it's possible. The other comment I will make, which is got a couple of our technical guys on the team, they're like, hey, you got to say this. So we are constantly working on making the insights both more accurate and more relevant to the agencies that we work with. And so we've just actually gotten an automated system to profile risks across intersections. And so we'll we now have it built in to provide kind of a top 10, here's the top 10 motion conflict pairs with risk. We do the same thing for red light running and all the analytics where we can build an automatic measure of this is worse than that. We'll do our best to provide that. We're also working to incorporate some recommendation countermeasure features into the analytics, and we're working with a few consulting firms on that, but I can't say more at the moment.
Okay. It is 1:20 and I don't see any more questions coming in. Thank you for all the presenters, Sean, David, Christina, and Andrew, for answering our questions. Julie.
Yes, thank you. Thank you again to our presenters. Thank you to our attendees. Thank you. Yeah, stay safe, stay healthy.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.